There is an ancient book written by a Jewish historian named Flavius Josephus, known as the History of the Hebrews. This book is interesting because it takes the accounts from the Bible and expands them with historical context, filling in gaps that the biblical text does not describe in detail. It covers events from the creation of the world up to the period nearing the destruction of Jerusalem, already under Roman rule. When someone reads only the Bible, especially in the Protestant version, there is a point where the narrative seems to jump abruptly. The Old Testament traditionally ends with the book of Malachi. Right after that, in the New Testament, the setting is completely different. A world appears with the Roman Empire, political figures like Herod, and religious groups such as the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots. None of this appears structured in the same way in the earlier books. This jump happens because there is a gap of about 400 years between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New. This period is not detailed in the Protestant Bible, since books like the Maccabees, which help explain this transition, are not part of that canon. It is precisely during this interval that the world changes completely. If we go back to the end of the Old Testament, the Jewish people were returning from exile in Babylon. Figures like Ezra and Nehemiah were leading the reconstruction of Jerusalem, its walls, and its religious life. It was a people trying to reorganize after a great destruction. But when we move forward to the time of Jesus, there is already a consolidated foreign domination, with Rome controlling everything. In the meantime, decisive events took place. One of them was the Maccabean Revolt, in which Jews fought against Hellenistic domination. After that came new power struggles until Rome took control of the region. And Rome, instead of placing a Jew as king, chose someone from outside. That king was Herod. He was not purely Jewish by origin, but an Idumean, descended from a people connected to Esau, the brother of Jacob. Esau, in tradition, gave rise to the Edomites, a people historically separate and at times enemies of Israel. The very name Edom is related to red, as are other ancient words connected to the idea of earth and human origin. Placing an Idumean as king over the Jews was, for many, a humiliation. He was a ruler chosen by Rome, someone who did not represent the people but the empire. This helps explain the political and religious tension present in the New Testament. But the account of Flavius Josephus goes beyond this historical transition. It also brings striking stories, such as the encounter between Alexander the Great and the high priest of Jerusalem. Alexander was on a military campaign, conquering territories. At a certain point, he faced a city that was extremely difficult to invade, built on a fortified island. With no direct access, he made an unusual decision. He spent months building an artificial path, a causeway, connecting the mainland to the island. When he finally reached it, he completely destroyed the city. During this campaign, he asked the Jews for help. The request was denied. Alexander then promised that after finishing his war, he would turn against Jerusalem. When he finally marched toward the city, he came determined to destroy everything. But something unexpected happened. As he approached, he did not find an army ready to fight. Instead, the high priest came out to meet him, dressed in his sacred garments. According to the account, upon seeing that figure, Alexander did something unthinkable. He knelt. The priest himself was confused. He did not understand why the greatest conqueror of the time was bowing before him. Then Alexander explained. He said that when he was younger, he had a dream. In that dream, he saw a man dressed exactly like that, telling him that the true God had chosen him to conquer nations. Recognizing that clothing, that image from his dream, he interpreted it as a sign. For him, that God was the same one who had spoken to him before. Instead of destroying Jerusalem, he spared it and favored the people. This episode, whether fully accurate or not in every detail, shows how traditions and historical interpretations attempt to connect political events with spiritual beliefs. Another important point in this narrative involves the Temple of Jerusalem. Before there was a fixed temple, there was the tabernacle, a mobile structure used during the period when the people were still on the move. Inside it was the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. The Ark is often represented as a box with two cherubim on top, but there is another interpretation, that it could actually resemble a throne. The cherubim, with their wings extended, could form something like a backrest. This connects with the idea that this place was the point where God manifested. Ancient accounts describe that when everything was done correctly, there were visible signs of this presence, such as a pillar of fire or light over the place. The priest would enter there to intercede for the people, presenting their sins and asking for forgiveness. Over time, the tabernacle gave way to the temple. The first temple was built by Solomon, the son of David. It was a grand structure, but centuries later, it was destroyed by the Babylonians, led by Nebuchadnezzar. The people were taken into exile. Years later, with the rise of a new empire, the Persians allowed the Jews to return. They rebuilt Jerusalem and later the temple. This second temple, at first, was simple, far inferior to Solomon's. But later, already under Roman rule, Herod decided to renovate and expand it, transforming it into an imposing structure. This was the temple that existed during the time of Jesus. Even so, it would also be destroyed. In the year 70, the Romans devastated Jerusalem. What remained was only part of the external structures, such as what is now known as the Western Wall. Another element that appears in this narrative is the Dead Sea. According to biblical tradition, it's linked to the region where Sodom and Gomorrah once stood, cities destroyed by fire and brimstone. The Dead Sea has a unique characteristic. Its extremely high salt concentration prevents life from existing in it. Some accounts attempt to explain this phenomenon by relating it to the destruction of those cities. There is also the story of Lot's wife, who, by disobeying the command not to look back, turns into a pillar of salt. One possible interpretation is that she was struck by toxic gases released during the destruction, which, upon reacting with the environment, left mineral residues on her body. All of this shows how history, tradition, and interpretation move together. When these accounts are observed in sequence, what emerges is not just a religious narrative, but an attempt to understand how a world was shaped over the centuries, leading up to the setting known in the New Testament.